Welcome to TradeNMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 3rd of May. No real surprises for Monday's action to start off the month. We had white leading, met the zero level that was expected, but we also knew that we were coming off of pretty depressed with the orange dip here and that. And like I said, within the declines, you can expect some swift turnarounds, and that's exactly what we saw. Of course, they made it interesting all day and waited till the later part to seize the opportunity where you have so many focused one direction. You can create these rips with short covering and just the lighter liquidity. Worked out fine. From a macro sense, it's just becoming clearer and clearer as you see foreclosures on the rise. Again, product unavailability, and obviously the inflation situation hasn't changed or improved in any way, shape, or form. Looking from the NQ standpoint, it had already been at the lows, made new lows, and then finished up on that. You still have the rising magenta over yellow, though. That's positive as long as with the blue rising. As long as there's no pivot below that 25, a pivot below that 25, we would expect new lows to be made. Everything worked from a DOC standpoint as far as orange dip and rising DOC red, and that into the next zone. The problematic standpoint is short-term buyers, no reset. Recently, we had it from back over here, but it's enough that you could get a push towards that 23%. Same with the S&P. It's at that point it becomes the critical phase as to whether or not they can actually move it above the 23 and hold it. We had that brief moment here where they did, but then the next day literally opened below and then kept trailing lower from there. The euro at its low peak, they're still trying to hold on to this because everyone understands at least from a currency standpoint, the breakdown here. But the EU is in a world of hurt because as Russia moves towards, like I said, the gold standard with their commodity box, that's based in US dollars for the most part. What does the euro have to offer in any of that equation? Nothing. So they're getting squeezed from an oil standpoint as well as natural gas. Prices going through the roof. Their economies are really, they're not helping themselves. They're really making all the poorest decisions possible. So not a shock. Of course, it makes it much cheaper to travel to Europe from a positive standpoint. From a gold standpoint, it's continuing. It hadn't made a turnaround yet. We did have the dip of the orange, but it did not come below below the red DOC before pivoting back up. And just now we're seeing the green, so we may still get some stabilization shortly, but there's just no fresh powder to jump into that. And this is something that we talked about. This helps quite a bit to substantiate that this is not trading per what the real metal situation is out there, but certainly within the context of paper market, certainly works. And you can see that final positive extreme right here, filled at the 1874 range. And two, when the market suffers lower moves, you tend to get a draw out of markets that way to cover hedging situations. It gets complicated with that, but suffice it to say, I'm not too surprised with it. Typically, too, we see the same situation in Bitcoin. Has been trading pretty parallel to the NASDAQ recently, and that's just because of the correlation with the futures and the ability to match that, as opposed to actually, trading the coin itself. Again, you get devoid from the actual thing. Much like mortgage-backed securities got away from actual mortgages. From an oil contract standpoint, we're still over that 100, in fact 105, still fairly strong from that standpoint, and just continues to make things expensive. This is not going to change. We've been talking about this one for some time. We were back up here all the way now down to 117. I've been saying 115 range would be my expectation near term before determining what was going to happen with treasuries, and so none of that's news. It's just more of the same. And there's Bitcoin from that standpoint, so that's pretty much that same basing we're seeing from the NASDAQ construct right there. slightly above the 23%. Again, wanting to push back towards that 39 level, where we've been between 40 and 39 for quite some time, but on the downside, you get that 34, but that would have to be some kind of significant event. ETH, again, just beautiful with the way it trades in there and end up power note going into the ed. From the 50K standpoint, well, like that short, got out of it just as the crossover of that magenta over yellow. This is something I'm working to adjust in that pink bar configuration, because again, when you get that dip of DOC orange below with the green rising, even the orange below green at that level would have been decent enough too. And you can see the dot stop at that particular spot, boom, all the way back up to 50%. Whether it's able to sustain that for very long, it's okay so far, so no problem from there. From the 5K standpoint, we ended up with a pretty erratic pre-market session. There's some pretty big ranges that were taking place in there. Some of that was difficulties they had in Europe with a couple of bad trades that sort of tweaked the European indexes. And by the time we get to the U.S. Open pre-market here, things have been kind of worked out. That's when it started to build a little bit of positive momentum there. And then we ended up with a nice run early midday. That was just the test to see how much strength the bulls could have. And once they stopped, all on positive extremes, of course, which began almost right before this bar, but officially right here, which took us all the way back to the 50%. So that was very easy, and then it just kept going from there. And then we based for quite some time right at the bottom. They made another attempt on falling 100%. It was very weak, though, overall, as MBI White took the lead early on with that first magenta dot. The secondary one was the dip below 33, and then it was just a matter of picking what your preference was, whether you wanted to see it below 25 or pivot lower of the yellow. Either one of those enough to take it for the ride, and that took us to brand new lows from there, and the weakness pretty much abounded all the way until we got to the later part of things. We saw DOC right here starting to build, P2 there, and then a much higher P2 right over here with the orange dip. That was the beginning of a solid attempt. Ended up with a little bit of a white spike before, and could have potentially been a much deeper move, but then we saw the pivot up of magenta once it crossed over. That was all she wrote right at the 50%, and then it was straight on buy program kick in, and this is what we talked about from the other video report, where it was the end of lockups and that for buybacks from large companies and things like that gave them the freedom. That was a good opportunity. I said anything that we dip below that 4,100, or even if it got down to the 4,000 range, was going to be an opportunity for them to really create a short cover rally and or just buy up the lighter liquidity, because just at this particular point, I don't know that you have a whole new series of people shorting. You already have those that are short, and then it's just a matter of flipping some of those put options and that from the dealer standpoint, and they can take advantage of the changing gamma and stuff, and it becomes a little more complicated, but makes it very easy for them to make these kinds of runs, and that pretty much held up through there. It made everything look very nice for the day, despite that early midday carnage, and that's kind of what we've been seeing though for the last week. And again, that's what I talked about. The Fed is very happy with this kind of volatility. The hope is that it's going to push people into treasuries. That hasn't worked so well, because you can see that the yield keeps rising, and that's just ahead of the expected interest rate increase. And then things will start to get interesting, because then you get budget deficit issues and stuff. So that's going to be a whole nother topic for the second half. Whew. A lot of fun. I said that volatility was going to get wild, and well, in fact, they're making me look good. As always, though, trade well. I'll continue to post updates on Skype chat. Have a good one.